Today we're going to talk about all things 5.4, including Flex Rating, the Timeless Isle, the Siege of Orgrimmar raid, professions, and hopefully get a peek at what's to come in the future. Welcome to TwizzCast, everyone, the official podcast of BlizzPro.com. Welcome to a very special episode of TwizzCast, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Twizz, and I am joined today by some pretty amazing people. I would like to start off with introducing my co-host, Hoda. Hello, sir.
Hey, what's up, man?
Not much. Good to have you, brother. Also with me on the line is a man who really needs no introduction at all. Would you please help me welcome back to the show, direct from Irvine, California, lead systems designer Greg GhostCrawler Street. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Very good. It's great to have you, as always. So, well, we only have a limited amount of time, so I would definitely like to make the most of it. Greg, one of the things that I found extremely funny during our 5.2 interview, I asked you about the possibility of training dummies being used to help train new tanks and healers. Your response at the time was, we're working on things, but it's going to be pretty awesome. Well, lo and behold, 5.4 is coming down the pipe, and you guys are introducing the Proving Grounds to us. So I'd like to take a few minutes and just kind of talk about them. Just so we have an idea of time involved with something like this, how long ago did the Proving Grounds start becoming a reality?
Oh, gosh. This was actually a 5.0 launch feature for us originally, and I think I might have even talked about it in a couple of interviews. It was an idea and it probably even went back to Cataclysm when we first had the idea and started working on it, but it's one of those things, other features kind of got in the way and we had to reprioritize things, and we finally said, I think we have the bandwidth in this patch to actually make Proving Grounds happen.
Wow. Okay. No, that's great.
Now, are you guys looking for Proving Grounds to be like an introduction to, say, tanking or healing, which are kind of the harder to do roles, and you're looking for groups? Or are you looking in the future to make it a way to better yourself by making it more difficult?
I think ultimately the answer is both. For 5.4, they're really targeted at max level characters. So if you, say, are a Shadow Priest, and you've always kind of been interested in healing, but always nervous to do it in front of a live audience, then Proving Grounds are a safe environment to try it out, to see how healing feels, and kind of learn the different spells and the situations where you'd use them. Assuming the feature works out well, and we're optimistic it's going to, we would like to use it in the future more as a training environment. We've even talked about there's a way that Proving Grounds can replace item level as the gating mechanism to get you into, say, Raid Finder or similar matchmaking content.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that would be pretty huge, to be honest with you. Now, as the developers have stated in the past, the raid encounters are obviously much more difficult than they used to be. As the difficulty scales in the future, would you likely consider altering Proving Grounds to make them more intense? Or I guess kind of I know we're in the infancy stage of it right now, but ultimately, where would you like to see them go?
Sure. So the way they'll work for patch 5.4 is there's 4 levels of Proving Grounds. If you set it to the bronze difficulty, that might be the equivalent of someone just stepping into a dungeon for the first time. So we would expect any experienced tank to have no trouble with bronze Proving Grounds. Silver's a little harder, gold's a little harder after that, and by the time you're in gold, it's throwing a lot of different situations at you, like target switching, interrupting, bombs, things like that. They're pretty common raid mechanics that we use over and over again. And then endless mode is just throwing you wave after wave of ramping difficulty with the intent that eventually will break you. There'll be some point at which you just can't do it anymore, so that we know, because if everyone can finish endless, then there's no way to compare yourself and no kind of additional ring to try to go after.
Okay. Do you have I don't know, like gear tiers, I would say? Like if, you shouldn't even try this gold level if you don't at least have an equipped eye level of this, because you'll just get stomped.
I mean, not really. In fact, the Proving Grounds scale all your gear down. I think it's to 463 at the moment, because we wanted it to be a test of skill and not gear, which is one of the reasons it's appealing to use that eventually as a matchmaking criterion. It's like, no, I don't have good gear, but dude, I got gold Proving Grounds. Obviously, I know how to tank.
Right.
So as long as I don't get one shot by the boss, you're probably safe in this dungeon with me.
That's awesome. It kind of makes like a foolproof system, as it were.
Hopefully. Now, this is the first time we've done that. We're going to find issues. We're going to find situations. Like, one off the top of my head is when you scale a healer's gear down to 463, say a raid healer who might have item level 500, 530 or something like that, you really feel it, and the mana is very hard to come by. So that's almost a relearning for a raid level healer to have to go in and heal something with such a small amount of regen. And there'll probably be other situations like that where we overemphasize target switching, so specs that can't target switch can't get as high a score as other specs. And we hope that players don't misuse Proving Grounds as some type of ranking of the effectiveness of each spec in the game.
They wouldn't do that, would they?
Oh, yes. In a heartbeat.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Now, on the other side of that, you're always talking about scaling people down. If a new max level character wanted to get into the Proving Grounds, would they have to get that item level, for example, your 463, or would they be scaled up, or is it always scaling down?
I think at the moment we're just going to scale down. We're not 100% sure on this yet, but the idea is that you can get 460-ish item level pretty easily, particularly with patch 5.4 and the Timeless Isle coming out. That gear shouldn't be that hard to come by.
Sure. Right.
Now, in the future, who knows? We'd love to be able to let lower level characters into there. I don't know if we could go as low as like level 15 when the dungeons kind of start, but that would be a really kind of stretch goal for us in the future.
Yeah,
cool.
It's kind of like every man for himself at that point, at level 15. But I would tend to think that you want to learn how to tank as you're going up, as opposed to now I'm at max level, now I'm going to try tanking. Because I think when the leveling process, especially if you're tanking through dungeons, that's where you're going to get the meat and potatoes of what it's like to be a tank. So I don't know. I'm very excited to see what you guys have cooking and just take it for a test spin. So
awesome.
Let's see here. On the topic of raiding, let's talk a little bit about the new 5.4 raid that is currently being tested. You've wanted to give the raids like an Ulduar feel, as you guys stated in the past when TOT launched. Do you guys feel that you followed the same ideas with the new raid that's coming out?
Wow, I mean, Ulduar could mean a lot of different things. It could mean it had a great story, it had great visuals, it had interesting boss encounters. I'll just say that with Siege of Orgrimmar, we wanted to have a lot of bosses, and we do. It's a very, very large raid. We have a little bit of branching. One of the criticisms that we called out ourselves on Throne of Thunder was that it was very linear. Once you go in, it's a straight shot to the end. So we have a choice or two in Siege. I think in future raids, we'd like to do even more of that. We really like that, say, Razor Scale in Ulduar was a boss you could eventually skip over, or you could decide which of the 4 keepers you wanted to do first. I think they don't translate super well to Raid Finder, but I think at the higher difficulty levels, that's a really fun decision for groups to make.
A lot of the raid teams in the Throne of Thunder, they kind of got hung up on the second boss, which was Horadon, and I mean by like semi-hardcore teams, like normal teams that got hung up on this. Where do we expect to see the new kind of roadblock in the new Siege of Orgrimmar, or is there one?
Hopefully there isn't one the same way. We agree in retrospect Horadon was too much of a step up from Jinrock, and ideally we could deliver on a smoother scaling experience from boss to boss. We're hoping that, say, the first 3 or 4 bosses in Siege of Orgrimmar, which is basically the first wing, is something that most guilds that consider themselves raiding guilds are going to be able to tackle without feeling like they hit a brick wall. And if they then get stuck on a boss for several weeks after that, they know at least they can gear up on those first 4 bosses. They'll be making progress.
Right.
Awesome.
That's ideal because it's happened. It happens. I don't know. It's happened several times on our raid team, Hoda. I mean, we hit Horadon. Believe it or not, it got kind of crazy.
Well, that's kind of someone's fault, but
hey, now he's picking on me in front of GhostCrawler for my raid leading. Okay, so I know that this was a subject that you wanted to cover, and I'm very anxious to hear more about this. So I know that weapon heirlooms were recently found on the PTR falling off of Garrosh Hellscream. Believe it or not, I am not going to ask you about the level 90 to 100 level range. What I would like to know, though, is a little bit about, why you chose to use them as boss drops. Was it for farming and replayability? Was it just to do something different? Or, what would you like to say about the heirlooms?
I'd say our motivation was all of those things. We wanted to make Garrosh a really memorable boss and have a really interesting loot table, and something we haven't done before. We also had players have had, I think, fairly valid complaints that Mista Pandaria was not as alt-friendly as our previous expansions. So we knew that patch 5.4 would be a great chance to let players kind of bring back the characters they hadn't been able to play as much, and the heirlooms are a great way to do that. So I think the way it works that isn't clear from just data mining the items themselves is that they're personal loot in Flex, Normal, and Heroic rating. And the first weapon that drops, if you're lucky enough to get one, will be for your current loot spec. So if you're a Ret Paladin, 100% guaranteed the first time you get a Garrosh weapon, Garrosh heirloom weapon, it's going to be a two-hander, two-handed strength weapon. After that, you can keep getting weapons, and it'll be random beyond that first point. So going back to the Ret Paladin example, you may then get a healing mace that you could use when your Paladin swaps to Holy, or you could give it to a Priest alt, and then maybe you'll get a bow if you're a Hunter. And very dedicated players can try to catch them all, and then they'll have these awesome heirlooms for every possible character they might want to have in patch 5.4, and then even on into the future.
Do you plan
That
on?
is crazy cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you plan on basically using the same system where it tracks? Oh gosh, I'm thinking of the current raid tier, or the other raid tier, where it tracked how many times you killed a boss, and if you didn't get a drop, it increased your chances. Are you going to implement that kind of a thing too? Like, well, he's killed this boss 4 times, and he's yet to have the agility polearm drop.
We'll at least do it for the first one. We don't want anyone to like kill Garrosh 20 or 30 times and never get their main spec weapon.
Right.
Not sure yet if we're going to do it for the additional ones beyond that first one.
Okay. Well, let's see here. I'm trying to go through my show notes. Like, that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. So
awesome. It's a really exciting feature, and we just wanted to. I know some players were anxious about the guild loot dynamics and how they were going to decide who gets the heirlooms, which is why we wanted to point out it'll feel a lot like bonus roll. You'll get one or you won't, and it won't necessarily matter what other players in the group have gotten.
Okay. Cool. Well, along the same lines as rating, let's talk about something that I'm very excited about, and that would be the Flex rating. You guys battled back and forth a little bit in setting the eye level rewards. It started out as, I think, 536 and currently set to 540. I'm kind of surprised that it's not a little higher towards 10-man eye level, since the raid itself scales dynamically with the number of people in your party. What were the challenges in creating Flex rating, and how did you come to the conclusion of the appropriate eye level reward?
Eye level is challenging because there's so many forces kind of acting upon it to come up with the perfect item level. If you make the items to use Flex for an example, if the item levels are too high, then there's strong motivation for every normal and maybe even heroic player to also run Flex, which wasn't really our intent. It also means that the encounters are probably harder since they're rewarding a higher item level, which means it's harder for players who have fallen behind or who are just coming back to be able to get in there. And we really wanted Flex to be like, if you consider your guild a casual raiding guild, Flex is probably targeted at you. We don't expect to see too many groups that just can't even handle the Flex difficulty. So we wanted to make sure the ceiling, the floor is pretty low, which meant the ceiling of the eye level had to be low too.
Now that you created this type of feature in-game, the sort of Flex, depending on how many people you have in your group, are you looking to adapt this technology to other parts of the game, maybe questing or even like 5-mans?
We've talked a lot about it. The answer is yes. There's a lot of different ways we could use it. Scenarios is one that we've talked about recently. Maybe a scenario could scale from 3 all the way up to 5.
Cool.
I'm not sure a 5-player dungeon works with fewer than 5 players. And
sure.
Going much beyond 5 players, sometimes the physical space of the dungeon or the encounters just assume that you're not going to bring 10 players along or something like that. But as long as we don't have to balance the challenge of the encounter on a razor's edge, which is why we'd probably never be able to offer the scaling size for heroic, we think there's a lot of possibility for the feature in the future. Really excited about it. It seems like it solves so many of the problems that groups have with the logistics of getting the right number of people together.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Just the logistics of making sure you have all your buffs covered, or the maximum amount of buffs that you can possibly. And it's too bad that some players have to sit the bench, not really because they're bad players, but just because they weren't able to bring the right buffs to the raid team or something like that.
Well, like as any guild leader knows, let's use the example of a 10-player raid right now. It's hard to have a roster of just 10 people, because that means whenever someone is out, you just don't raid. So you really need a roster of, say, 11 to 12 people, but that means some nights 12 people are going to show up, and you're going to have to break the bad news to someone. So we really love the idea that whoever shows up, within reason, you'll be able to go. We've even, now this isn't something we can do for 5.4, but we've even entertained the idea that maybe more than 25 people show up. Maybe 27 people show up. Maybe you can still go with a 27-player raid that night.
Confirmed, 40-man raids are back. You heard it here first.
Up to some limit. I don't know what the limit would be. Probably not 40. Maybe 30 or something.
Oh, all right. Well, I'd like to change gears up for the second time and kind of get away from raiding. We've recently been introduced to connected realms. And again, during your previous interview, you had said that the developers and yourself were in the middle of addressing realm population and faction imbalance problems. This looks, at least on paper, like it's going to solve a lot of the problems like dead auction houses on low pop realms and Horde or Alliance heavy servers. Is the current plan to merge 3 or 4 servers together at a time if they're low pop, 1 or 2 at a time if they're high pop, or will it just be situational to your server?
It'll be situational. We really kind of have a target population in mind of how many people we think it feels good to have on a realm before you start running into, say, queues to log on. In some cases, 2 realms are probably sufficient to hit that population. In other cases, maybe a lot more. And we're just going to have to look at each realm on an individual basis and decide how many other realms it should be connected to give players a good experience.
Oh, all right.
And that's probably worth pointing out that this is the kind of feature that we need to roll out slowly. This is not going to be launch day for 5.4, all of a sudden realms are all connected. We'll probably start with a small pool of realms, make sure that it's stable, make sure the technology and the gameplay works, and then slowly expand it over time with the lessons learned from that initial pool.
Okay. So, which leads me, I kind of have another question along those lines. Let's say, okay, I'm the GM of Twisted Empire on Coltiris. Let's say that you merge Coltiris with another realm that has a Twisted Empire on there. How is that going to work with multiple toon names, multiple guild names, and stuff like that?
Well, one of our goals with the feature was not to stomp on anyone's names. We think it's a really bad experience for someone who logs in and says, well, we had to change the name of your character or change the name of your guild, sorry. You know, Not only do you lose that identity, but then your friends can't find you anymore. You know, if someone who hasn't played decides to come back for a future expansion and then like, where's the guild? Where are all my friends?
Right.
We don't think that's a good experience. So we want to make sure that everyone can keep their name, whether their player name or their guild name, and we'll just designate the differences between 2 players. In the really unlikely event that someone has the exact same player name and the exact same guild name as yours, there'll be a symbol next to their name indicating that, you know, it's this other dude, it's, you know...
Oh, I got you.
Guildmaster number 2 and not you. And then we're trying to do clever things with, like, autocomplete so that you're on someone's friend list, your name pops up first, not the other guy's name popping up when they're, like, doing a chat or a /inspect or something.
I see. Okay. Well, yeah, because yeah, I just kind of worried. It's like, so we're kind of looking at, you know, you're going to have to invite Twizz, number sign, Coltiris, whatever, you know. That's kind of what we're looking at, I guess, is essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, like if you started to type Twizz, it would autocomplete with what it thought was the right one, and it would probably offer a confirmation to say, like, you know, are you sure this is the dude you wanted to invite, and things like that. Okay. We don't want to make this a big imposition to players. The whole point is just to give them more potential candidates for their guild, to give them players they can raid with or quest with, to make the auction house economy a little more robust, and so on.
Right on. Well, shifting gears for the last time, I promise. I'd like to talk about the Timeless Isle a little bit. I saw the different tiers of chests that increase rewards as the chests become more difficult to access. You have the ability to take 496s and upgrade them to a much higher eye level via these chests. I suppose what I'd like to ask you is, do you feel that you're offering too much at times in the way of eye levels and making it hard to keep up with for casual players? It's
definitely a complicated system when you look at all the different, you know, there's scenarios and heroic scenarios, and now 4 tiers of rating, and oh, by the way, there's Thunderforged, and you can upgrade these items twice with Valor. If you look at it as a complete package, there's a lot of component parts there. Fortunately, for the most part, players just need to worry about, is that item an upgrade or not? Is it higher item level than what I currently have? If so, it's probably an upgrade for most players, unless they're super sophisticated theory crafters. And so that's what we really want players to focus on, is what are the different systems out there that can increase the quality of their gear, and where it is, and how do they access, and is it approachable to them? One of the challenges for an area like the Timeless Isle is it's targeted at a wide variety of players. So we need to make sure someone in 460 Blues can go out there and make progress while still offering, it may be hard to entice the heroic raider out there, but at least for the larger raiding population that has some really powerful gear, that there's still reasons to go to the Timeless Isle and spend some time there when it's their off-raid night.
Do you think it would be easier to have fewer item levels with like a harder path to attain them, or the more item levels with easier paths to get rewards? And you kind of mentioned this earlier as to Proving Grounds being maybe a way to introduce those item levels as well.
It's just a tension between how many different types of ways do we want to offer to play the game. For example, if they're heroic scenarios and they don't offer very powerful item level rewards, well, no one's going to run them.
Sure.
If they're heroic scenarios that offer the same item level as raiding, well, then everyone's going to run them, and raiding may drop off. So we end up just slicing these item level distinctions very thin sometimes to make sure that there's always an upgrade path. When players can't get better gear, it's an opportunity for them to kind of get bored of playing the game, and they feel like there's no opportunity for advancement.
Oh yeah, and that's exactly, that's how I feel as a casual player. It's like I could log on and maybe try and make a little bit of headway towards getting my next, big eye level upgrade, or I have 3 or 4 different options to at least upgrade a little bit and make my time in game feel like I really actually did accomplish something. Because everybody likes to look at the purples,
One of the things I really like about the way the Timeless Isle is shaping up is that it has both the deterministic and non-deterministic rewards. And what I mean by that is, as you just go through and kill snakes or turtles or animals like that, you'll accrue timeless coins, and eventually you can spend those on some pretty decent gear. You also have a chance of just randomly getting these epic drops. So if you only have 20 minutes to play, well, maybe there's a chance you'll get an epic drop. If not, you're going to slowly work on your timeless coin stockpile and eventually have a reward waiting at the end.
Cool. Yeah. All right. One of the last things that I'd like to talk about is professions. I know that I, for one, am very happy with what you've been doing to help boost the ease of profession leveling. Cooking and mining are pretty much the first things that come to mind. But the addition to getting bonus skill points for items that are harder to craft was also a huge help. So in the future, is there any plans to put professions on the express lane to a point with all the heirlooms and possible potions of XP that might be coming out? It's easier to focus on leveling your character, and the professions go to the wayside. Professions shouldn't be a cakewalk, but it does kind of suck having to spend gold and time crafting unusable and unsellable items at max level.
Yeah, totally. So there's a couple problems there you identified. One is that because we've added so many ways to boost your leveling, whether it's the guild perks or heirlooms or things like that, it's easy for your character level to outstrip the corresponding profession level. And that's just a problem that we need to fix. Unfortunately, it's a very time-consuming problem to fix because we have to go through and decide what to do with every one of those recipes, and do we pull them, which then might make players mad that before they could get this particular cloak that's now unavailable. Yeah. And then the other half of it is just the pain of a player makes the very legitimate decision, I don't want to be a jewel crafter anymore, I want to be an enchanter. What is the expense, both in terms of like player time and relearning and gold that they're going to have to do to make that profession jump? We don't want it to be as trivial as, say, swapping specs of your characters, but it shouldn't be such a pain that someone would never even really consider it. So I think, like you said, the cooking and some of the work we've done with blacksmithing and mining are kind of the direction we'd like to go in the future. It's very designer-intensive work to update each one of those professions, but we're really happy with the way they've gone so far, and we have plans to do more of that in future expansions. Nice.
And you kind of struck a chord there. I never really even thought about the recipes involved and stuff like that. I mean, you start taking stuff like that away and whatever, you're striking at the transmog lovers out there. You know what I mean? Because there's some older stuff that's pretty awesome, and so I never even thought about that fine of a line that you'd have to walk of, do we pull them? Do we change them? What do we have to do to make this happen? So,
And even if it's not a transmog concern, and I agree that it totally is, someone might have 700 leatherworking recipes, and they just wake up one day and now they only have 200. I mean, that kind of sucks. They worked hard to earn all those, and they, were taking away something they worked hard to get, which never feels really good.
Right. And content that developers in the past spent time making and everything. That's just work that just gets erased.
Well, I mean, that's true, but we're kind of used to that. We redid Westfall, and, we lose the hard work all the time. That's part of the job.
Well, hats off. So, let's see here. I did want to cover one thing very quickly. Today, you released a blog about class balancing in 5.4 and some of your reasons behind it. It's a very lengthy post, and covering it would take every second that we had available. Can you tell us what the post contains and what you're trying to convey to the player base?
Yeah, I think so. We have a lot of players who are very engaged with the community. They read the forums, they read prominent websites, they listen to podcasts like your guys, or they follow me on Twitter. Then we have a huge majority of players who don't do any of that, and for them, they just see a patch note and they're like, "This makes no sense to me. I don't understand what problem the developers are trying to fix." The water cooler articles are pretty widely read, particularly in other regions that don't necessarily have all the English access to the developers as folks in the United States do. So it's a way of just communicating large trends that we're trying to solve or things that might be head scratching. The blog really wasn't focused at all on DPS tuning because that's something that's still ongoing, and ultimately, a class is either performing where we want it to perform or it's not, and we can kind of tune those numbers up and down. But it's more the philosophical changes that players may not understand, like, why is my mitigation going away? Or why did they change this talent that I thought was a perfectly fun talent? I think players aren't always going to agree with this. In fact, they're often not going to agree with this. But when we can provide the context, they can at least say, well, I see what they were trying to do. I still disagree with the change, but it makes more sense to me of what they thought they were solving.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hoda.
No, absolutely. There's been a lot of people lately just saying, "Oh, you always change my class. How am I supposed to learn it over and over?" Like, especially in Mr. Pandaria, I think the Warlock, as you mentioned in your post, has had a lot of changes as well. But like you said, it's kind of that balancing act where you want to get it where it's supposed to be, but how do you make everybody happy at the same time?
Oh man, this is the stuff that legitimately keeps me up at night. What is the right amount of change to inflict on existing classes? Because we know there are players that are, they're angry, they're desperate for change because they're so frustrated with a particular mechanic. And then we have other players, I meet them all the time, who say, I really liked my Fire Mage, but you changed it so much that I felt like I had to relearn it. And I'm sure it's a better design, but I just, I can't stick with it anymore. I don't have that bandwidth to learn it again. It's too exhausting, or I don't have the time, or whatever. And so we know that there's a huge cost to changing classes, and it can be a very real cost if players unsubscribe because the degree of change is so much that they feel like they can't keep up. So we really have to balance that with people who, they see a flaw in their spec, they understand we could make some little tweak and that would fix it, or we could do a radical overhaul like we did with the Warlock. Guess I want to impress the community that there are pros and cons to all of those decisions, and we agonize about them all the time.
Yeah, we're creatures of habit and we hate change, but at the same time, we love it, so...
It's also exciting. It's fun to see a new talent, or it's fun to see, like, oh, there's this new mechanic I didn't have before. Again, it has a cost, but we recognize that there's some of that that's helping to keep it fresh for someone who's maybe played a rogue or a hunter for 8 or 9 years now and hasn't seen a huge degree of change.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of the community, and that's what this is all about. That's why we do podcasts. That's why I'm here. Our friend Ro over at Realm Maintenance, he does a podcast that covers all of the podcasts in the WoW community and stuff. And Ro submitted a question for me, and for all the hard work that he does, I definitely wanted to at least read it to you. He says, I don't believe you've confirmed this anywhere yet, but with most of the current Valor gear becoming purchasable with Justice in 5.4, will we see our current Valor points converted to Justice?
Our plan right now is not to touch Valor points. So players who want to stockpile their 3,000 Valor and have it ready to go when patch 5.4 hits, you should be able to do that, and you probably want to start thinking about that. Okay. We are still going to do the normal PvP conversion of converting Conquest down like we did. So PvE will stay the same, but PvP will get converted the way it typically does.
Okay. Excellent.
Cool.
Well, I'll tell you what, that eats up our 30 minutes. Believe it or not, that was the fastest 30 minutes of my life. Greg, we cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your ridiculously crazy schedule to come out on the show and talk to us.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. I really do love a chance to do stuff like this. So don't think of it as an imposition. Think of it as an opportunity for us.
Awesome. Well, you are welcome back anytime. So, for all of you listening, this interview will be available on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and the MP3 will be available at TwizzCast.com. I'd like to take a second and just thank the show's sponsors, Doghouse Systems, Steel Series, /Loot, and our affiliates, Ask Mr. Robot and Open Raid. Ladies and gentlemen, from the crew here at Blizz Pro and TwizzCast, we encourage you to game safe, love one another, and please, everyone within the sound of my voice, take care. Hey guys, you've been listening to TwizzCast, the official podcast of BlizzPro.com. You can follow us all on Twitter at TwizzCast, at TwizzTE, at TankThatReb, and at Willie_Foss. The show notes and articles that we discuss can be found at BlizzPro.com. And if you'd like to drop us a line, send the email to podcast@BlizzPro.com. Thanks again, and we will catch you next week.